Imagine you've gone caving deep into the barely explored depths of the earth. This was your first mistake if you wanted to live. You've navigated your way deeper and deeper into the cool, damp darkness, through narrow passages and even one stretch underwater, to finally arrive at your target destination. A massive cavern opens up before you, stalactites and stalagmites forming columns stretching from floor to the ceiling high above you. You exhale in satisfaction at the sight of the cave, illuminated by your torch, one of only a dozen or so souls to see this place in the last century. But something seems odd. You ponder this for a few minutes, listening to water drip from the limestone, until you realize that the cave doesn't echo as it should. Something is different here. That is the first sign that you are in the presence of the Cave Brachiosaurus. The Cave Brachiosaurus is a monster designed by Crabdominal Pain, which is a simply fantastic handle. And since seeing the art for this creature, it's been living in my head rent-free. So of course I overthink it and try to work out the biology of such a creature to make it plausible. It's also simply a fantastic horror concept. Tumblr already loves it, and I'll talk a bit about why this is such an effective creation as well. Real Brachiosaurus lived approximately 150 million years ago, and probably ate ginkgo leaves around the middle of the North American continent. The African Brachiosaurus was renamed Giraffatitan and looks very similar. This extremely large herbivore is well known in media and toys and is generally considered friend-shaped. And really, what dinosaur-obsessed child hasn't played with a Brachiosaurus in the sandpit making noot-noot noises on a sunny afternoon? Because I've done that as an adult. They would have started life approximately the size of a house cat and grown to the size of a horse within a year, but they continue to grow until adulthood, reaching around 10 metres high or 20 metres long. This specimen, named Sisyphus by her creator, pictured in the original art, looks to be as tall as some pine trees, and pine trees can grow up to 40 metres tall quite commonly, so the Cave Brachiosaurus is quite a lot bigger than its traditional cousins. So this raises an interesting question. Either this Brachiosaurus monster is roaming around a Christmas tree farm, or the creature which evolved in the dark, tight spaces of caves ended up being much larger than the creatures with free roaming space above. So now imagine you're back to exploring the cave, making your way across the uneven ground, weaving between stalagmites, when you come across it. Or at least part of it, the leathery neck, or maybe it's the tail, lying across the ground, weaving between columns of limestone like a snake, but not. There are small areas of thickened skin and broken off quills like the shafts of feathers, with mottled colours and an altogether organic appearance, but something is very odd about it. Not just the thing's length winding between stony columns, but its position. You're familiar with snakes, which nearly always lie belly down, but this thing seems twisted. Sometimes the underside is down, and sometimes it's up, and there doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason to it. You stare at it, thinking you should run, but you're not sure what you're running from, or if it's noticed you. You're not even sure it's alive because of the odd posture flopped onto the ground. You decide it's probably not been here that long, as it's wet but there's no mineral deposits built up over it. You just don't know what it is. Curiosity will be your downfall as you pick a direction and decide to follow it. So why would a Brachiosaurus have found herself in a cave deep below the surface in the first place? Let alone how did we end up with one 150 million years later? One possibility is that she wandered in seeking salt licks, as herbivorous animals sometimes do, creating salt ingestion caves in both prehistoric times and the modern day. But falling down a sinkhole is another possibility, though a tragically unlucky one. But even if she is here by choice,
A brachiosaurus can't live off salt alone.
They consumed huge quantities of plant matter to sustain themselves. They also probably hung out in herds more often than not. So what is there down in these caves to feed a herd of Brachiosaurus for millions and millions of years?
Well, my hypothesis is that there isn't anything, and actually that this one got eaten.
At the time of writing the script for this video, there wasn't much written about this monster, Sisyphus. But we have been told that every part of her is prehensile in order to fit through crevices and into tiny gaps, and that her bones are cartilage so they're flexible. We also know that she can evert her bones out of her body to reach further and can extend her nerves out of her head as sensory prehensile tendrils.
And this is simply a fantastic visual, a real beauty. But although they might look like nerves, a nerve doesn't move on its own. And cartilage, although more flexible than bone, doesn't really squish down. Try compressing your own ear cartilage. It can contort, but not really compress. It might look a lot like it, but I think this cave Brachiosaurus is made of something else. In fact, despite the visible skeleton, I don't even think this creature is a chordate.
Now imagine a poor, sweet baby Brachiosaurus wandering through the ginkgo forests she calls home during her first year of life. She's having a lovely but ordinary life, eating lots of plants, growing constantly, until one day something tragic happens. Maybe she was being chased, or maybe it was just bad luck, but she tumbled down a sinkhole into the dark caves below. She's alone here, but trapped. If she was lucky, she would have died instantly from the impact of dropping such a large body that distance. If not, she's almost certainly injured in some way that's not recoverable. And if by some miracle she's made it all the way down there without being injured, she has no way to get out. There's very little food for a Brachiosaurus down there, just the dying leaves that fell down, perhaps a little moss. Her life will be, unfortunately, short, and the time she has left will be full of longing for the world above. But her body will become a monument, curated by the thing that eats her. Let's imagine yourself back in that cave, following that long cylindrical organ across the cave floor, weaving between the stalagmites. Your best guess was that it was some sort of snake, but you doubt it's alive, and that assumption has made you bold. It doesn't really look like it slithered in here. It looks more like it was carelessly dropped, and it certainly doesn't seem to be breathing. But then, after following the thing for a few meters, you come across something that is definitely not a snake. Your torch, the brightest light this cave has seen in many years, illuminates a large, rounded mound of flesh clinging to the wall. And it is definitely clinging. The thing has 4 contorted limbs with stubby fingers that grip it, holding what is apparently its belly flat against the wall. The whole body is bigger than a car, bigger than your lounge room even. You freeze, stunned it hasn't noticed you, before it slowly dawns on you that you cannot see the head.
You have found yourself at the rear end of the cave Brachiosaurus, and you might think that this is a relatively safe place to stand, if you have to be near her at all, but you are wrong.
Think back to our poor, sweet little Brachiosaurus who has tumbled down into the depths of the cave. She is hurt and scared here in the dark, and so very distressingly alone. There is no food, no family, and nothing familiar for her at all. In a very practical sense, for her, falling into this dark cave is falling into hell. Her only thought, her only desire, is to get back up and into the world of light where her herd is, and she is so hungry down here. Eventually, thoughts filled with longing for the world of light above, she dies. Have you heard of chemical memory? It's a term used to describe the delightful little fact that you can apparently transfer a memory from one leech who knows how to solve a maze to another simply by feeding the first leech to the second. This is not a well understood mechanism and probably needs further study if anyone is willing, but the thing that eats our sweet little Brachiosaurus eventually seems to absorb her lingering desire to get back up, out of the cave and return home. But that's not the only parts that the thing that eats her will preserve.
A real Brachiosaurus is a fascinating feat of biology.
Using that long neck and huge mass to forage in a wide radius for each step it takes. They also have a number of adaptations which let them reach and maintain their huge size. One of these is air sacs within their bones. This allowed the bones to reach a much larger size without the corresponding increase in mass and weight. The more mass a creature has, the more calories and protein are required to maintain it. Brachiosaurus may have also had subcutaneous air sacs, which further reduces the mass required.
Which is a great idea if you're a humble amoeba, an ancient slime mold doing its best to scavenge a living in the damp darkness of the cave.
It's not hard to imagine how a slime mold might have found its way into the bottom of the cave. They often reside in forest floors, eating leaf litter or whatever other biological material comes along. They're not too fussy about what they consume, and they like their world dark and moist. A slime mold might have been slowly crawling around down there, eating scraps for decades. As it turns out, slime molds don't age, so they don't expire from old age. If they have enough food and don't take damage, they could possibly live forever. Finding a deceased Brachiosaurus, even a juvenile one, when there are no other large carrion feeders down in the dark, is like a whale fall at the bottom of the ocean. A miraculous surge of nutrition from the heavens above. And even if the slime mold has to share this bounty with other detritivores, like fungi or bacteria, it's not terribly fussy and will end up eating them too. And every cell in this body of the fallen god on which it now feasts longs to go home, to the world of light above. Slime molds are intriguing little life forms that don't follow the same rules as us chordates, aka creatures with spines, tend to do. They spend most of their life as a plasmodium, which is a large, potentially very large, single cell that shares numerous nuclei. If it has been split up, it can fuse back together and shares its nutrients between all cells involved in the fusion. They do not think the way that creatures with an identifiable brain think, by forming synapses and transmitting electrical signals, but they are capable of learning.
They also do not perceive the world the way that we do, with our complicated network of synapses and specialised sensory apparatuses. But they do perceive it, being able to detect light and chemicals and the hardness of objects. Normally they retreat from light, but they can learn. And maybe, just this once, the slime mold learns to yearn for the light that the divine corpse upon which it feeds so longs for. But our little slime mold is not built for such a task. But it has got time during which it is feasting on more food than it's ever seen in its living memory, and it has a basic level of problem solving. What we will never know is whether it worships the divine carcass upon which it feeds, but it does emulate it.
Slime mold can naturally get quite big for what are technically single-celled organisms, though practically they are many-celled organisms that have fused back into one single cell. This means there is no specialization. Complex organisms like you and I, or the poor doomed Brachiosaurus, have numerous different cell types which all do different jobs. The cells of our retina are specialized in such a way that they will never produce bone the way our osteoblasts in our bones do, or stomach acid like our gastric mucosa does. But for the slime mold, all parts of the cell do all the jobs, and every part of the surface is sensory.
It's unclear how much a slime mold thinks in the way we understand it.
Trying to comprehend the body of the poor Brachiosaurus must be such a cosmic horror experience. But the one thing the slime mold has on its side is time, because it has a nearly unlimited amount of that. A single cell has a limit on the size it can reach, because it lacks lungs or a respiratory system. It's dependent upon oxygen diffusing across its cell membrane, and there's only so far that it can effectively reach. But our Brachiosaurus, why, she was full of air sacs. There are interconnected bubbles of air, which means much less of the flesh is too far away from an air pocket. All the slime mold has to do is copy the shape around the air sacs, and suddenly it has a template for achieving a bigger size without compromising oxygen diffusion as much as it otherwise would have.
And these bones, well, there's still quite a lot of cartilage in a juvenile Brachiosaurus. They do provide a handy firm surface for the slime mold to cling to, though the slime mold, of course, has no concept about which bones are meant to be that way and which bones are broken. They're a useful leverage point, again, laced with air sacs, so all the slime mold has to do is copy their shape. The exact structure is a bit confusing, a mix of mineral and protein, but the cartilage is mostly protein and easier to emulate than bone. There are lots of cells in the doomed Brachiosaurus which produced collagen and elastin. Perhaps the slime mold recycled those proteins, or perhaps it annexed some of the cellular machinery required to do so in order to maintain the cartilage shapes it crawled across as it fed.
Eukaryotic cells, those with a nucleus, have permanently borrowed cellular components without digesting them in the past. This is how we got mitochondria, and this is how plants got chloroplasts in the first place.
It's not unreasonable to hypothesize that a slime mold did the same with some protein secretion mechanisms. And skin. Oh, what a biological marvel is skin! It does make it harder to climb by sticking to objects, but if you carry it on the outside, it reduces your water loss, letting the slime mold survive slightly drier and harsher environments. Now, it can't digest food from any surface covered in skin, of course, nor can it sense the light through it, but the skin itself has small holes here and there where the Brachiosaurus used to have quills or ornamentation, and that's where sensory tendrils of the slime mold could sort of push through, so it can still see through little holes across the surface, and there's still a benefit to carrying around the skin.
Now it has an approximation of bones from the doomed Brachiosaurus, and it's replaced the flesh with its own mobile body. It can use the limbs to reach and pull. It no longer needs to remain in one place to feed. It can pull food closer to it in order to surround it with the bulk of its cell for absorption. Months, maybe years after the poor Brachiosaurus first succumbed and the slime mold discovered it, her neck moves. Ungainly at first, the neck swings using leverage and momentum to land against another pile of fallen leafy debris and grab a mouthful with unfamiliar teeth. The slime mold drags it down the throat towards the center of its mass, where it's easier to distribute the nutrients around it. Maybe these large organisms had a good idea, dragging food into the center of the body for redistribution. Even if the slime mold lacks the sophisticated organs the Brachiosaurus had, it emulates the principle. When alive, the doomed Brachiosaurus probably didn't chew much anyway, just grabbed mouthfuls of food and swallowed, so her reanimated body does much the same. Over years, the slime mold comes to find that the long neck and tail are an advantage, as the longer they are, the further they can reach in order to drag food back to the center of mass. It doesn't actually understand how digestive systems are supposed to work, though, so it's not fussy about whether the grabbed food comes through the mouth or with the prehensile tail, and through which end the food is deposited into the center of the body. Really, any gap in the skin to expose the slime will function perfectly well for consuming food, and as it tends to keep its belly devoid of skin to better cling to the cave walls, she tends to just shove food directly into her belly region. The slime mold tried to copy the modified bones where able, but can only do so imperfectly. Instead of vertebrae, it creates blocky approximations, a mixed mimicry of the intact and broken bones confused by growth plates, and instead of a calcified matrix, it has secreted a combination of collagen and elastin into these pseudocartilage shapes. This means the pseudojoints can bend in literally any direction, but this pseudocartilage can also be compressed and expand again once Sisyphus has squeezed through a crevice. And they do extend her reach, much further than the living Brachiosaurus would have been able to.
But after years and years, or decades, she finally runs out of food within reach of her extended limbs. Perhaps the sinkhole through which she came has finally closed over. At last, with a long time of trial and error, the Cave Brachiosaurus stands up on aberrant legs. This is the rise of Sisyphus. Time is pretty meaningless to a slime mold, so this rebirth likely happened across an extremely long period of time. And it happened with no grand plan. The slime mold doesn't know what a Brachiosaurus is supposed to be. Probably can't even perceive it. It's just copying shapes and patterns that have worked, and coincidentally allowed it to reach a size and mass that it has no capability to comprehend. It will take a long time for it to learn to walk this body, but walking is just a pattern of movement, and this slime mold is getting good about patterns. It will take a long time, but Sisyphus has millions and millions of years as the slime mold seeks food, and perhaps a way to satisfy its fallen god's desire to return to the light and her herd.
There's a few cosmetic consequences to constructing the Cave Brachiosaurus this way. Firstly, the skin is just a waterproof covering, and the slime mold that maintains and replicates it has no perception of colour or what it's supposed to look like. It's likely a mixed hodgepodge of dorsal and ventral patterns or other features. It's also not truly part of the creature. It's more wearing that skin like a coat, which it has secreted and maintained. It finds it useful, but it can be discarded or slipped off, such as when reaching or squeezing through the small gaps. If damaged, Sisyphus could also choose to digest the skin and begin again. The creature also has no fat. Its only flesh is the slime mold, which is all the same. It might have been maintaining certain structures by secreting structural proteins like collagen, but it doesn't understand the blueprint, and its other functions for life are maintained by the massive plasmodium. It does not need to breathe, it moves in a way most similar to hydraulics, and it makes no digestive sounds. It doesn't need to make sounds to communicate, so other than the rustle of the skin coat, this creature is basically silent.
The pseudocartilage is not true cartilage. It's squishier and will bounce back into shape. This allows Sisyphus to squeeze through ridiculously small spaces, and thanks to the elastin and air sacs, basically reinflate herself like a balloon.
She may have kept her original teeth, or as she was a juvenile, she might have had both deciduous and unerupted adult teeth, which the slime mold preserved in an erratic pattern. It's possible the slime mold decided that teeth were useful and tried to relocate or replicate some at the tail end as well. Her eyes would be shriveled. The slime mold has no concept of vision as we do, as it senses light all over its body and would see no reason to preserve eyeballs in the dark. But the sockets are still there. The slime mold is normally somewhat sticky, and it has a weak sense of gravity, so it has found it advantageous to allow holes in the skin coat around the feet and the underside of its digits, to allow it to grip the walls of the cave with the slime mold directly. It can sometimes park the body on the roof while the head and neck extend through the cave, looking for food or a new exit, but this is getting harder to do as Sisyphus grows larger. Which is how you found Sisyphus in the cave, her body clinging to the wall while the neck and tail sprawled out across the cave floor, looking for food and exits. Sisyphus doesn't breathe, as we said, and she holds very still most of the time to conserve energy. There's not a lot to eat down here, but when she finds something, she transfers it to the body cavity to carry with her and consume at her leisure. The patterns on her pale skin don't make sense to a creature with functioning eyes such as yourself, like they've been bleached and warped. You dare not touch her as you pass your torchlight over the body, trailing the tail as it weaves its way into the darkness, trying to get a sense of where the creature ends. You presume that somewhere there must be a head, and the head is the part you're worried about, because you assume that's the end that could see you. But Sisyphus had no need for eyes, remember? Because the slime mold senses light with every part of its exposed surface. While you stand there in proximity, scanning your light across her body, Sisyphus knows you're there, but she doesn't know what you are. From pores from the tail nearest to you, along the ground, sensory tendrils exude from under the skin, reaching towards the light and your interesting scent. Normally a slime mold hides from light unless it's ready to reproduce, but Sisyphus has reached a size where she can afford some curiosity. Food is scarce down here, and anything of interest deserves to be investigated. Besides, light came from above. It's her only clue the rudimentary thinking can use to find a new way out. As light as a feather, some of the tendrils narrow in on the skin above your sock. Very rarely has she encountered something like you before, but Sisyphus knows what you are. You are protein. She's found you by chance, but she knows this cave well. It's overlaid with a map of her own pheromone trails. The neck moves, pulling itself slowly, the slime contracting the structural bony shapes around to swing the head in your direction. Your bravery abandons you and you dive behind a stalagmite, hoping to stay out of sight of Sisyphus. But she doesn't seek her food by vision. The tail is moving too now, weaving its way through the cave in a way it shouldn't be able to, the eldritch shapes it makes causing your stomach to turn. You think it's behind you, some sixth sense causing the hairs on the back of your neck to tingle. In a last-ditch effort to distract the creature, you throw your torch as far away from you as you can, the light flying through the air to clatter elsewhere in the cave. But Sisyphus has never learned to associate sound with food. Trembling, barely able to bring yourself to breathe, you step away from the stalagmite and look behind you. The head is here, the bony skull coated in a web of slime, pushing itself into the space between you, having left the less mobile skin behind it. Sensory tendrils reach out into space like thick pink nerves, searching for your scent, your heat, and carbon dioxide in your breath. You run, back the way you think you came, but you don't get very far before tripping over part of Sisyphus you didn't know was there. The tail contorts like setting off a trap, wrapping itself around your body as the head continues to advance. You struggle, of course, but this only causes Sisyphus to constrict tighter. Bits of her ooze out of pores in the skin to start digestion then and there, to get a taste of you. After all, nutrition is precious down here. The head has reached you now, sensory tendrils consolidating as they find you, slipping under layers of clothing to the more nutritious flesh. The head, ominously slow, follows and clamps the jaw down on whatever it can reach first. Sisyphus may have a second false head at the tip of the tail. The slime mold doesn't know what a Brachiosaurus is supposed to look like, and found teeth useful for grabbing and dragging things. Perhaps the slime mold copied the shape of teeth at the other end of the creature, or perhaps it simply relocated some immature dentition to the tail for a better grasp. Between the two appendages and her own wrappings, she has a pretty good grip of you now as she drags you back to the bulk of the body. You might scream. Sisyphus doesn't register what such a noise is for. Her instincts are to deposit you into the central mass of the body for ease of absorption, so that is what she does. But you are a protesting pile of protein. Your struggles do not make it easy compared to leaf litter or carrion, so she attempts to deposit you by the fastest route. While any tear in the skin coat she maintains would do for depositing you into the central mass, the exposed plasmodium of the skinless belly is the most efficient route for consuming you, so that is where you are placed. There is no dignity in being eaten this way, only horror as she maneuvers you into her exposed belly. More sensory tendrils, just like from her head, reach out through this hole to find, taste, and grab you, guiding you into the mass of slime. The sheer bulk of slime mold that weighs down upon you will contain you quickly. If you could see, you'd see that everything looks the same in here. Some air-filled ribs provide structure, but it's a web of slime mold the whole way through. And that web closes around you, sucking out air to suffocate you and maximize the surfaces that the slime mold can touch you for digestion. The slime mold will even seep down your throat and airways, so while Sisyphus doesn't think about actively killing you, you will suffocate quickly. She doesn't really understand alive the way we do. You're just protein. Eventually, she'll locate your torch and may display some curiosity about it until the light goes out. From then, it's basically just another rock to her. And once every useful part of you is digested, she'll expel anything inedible that you were carrying. And meanwhile, she'll continue looking for a way out. Because that's what Sisyphus wants, really, a way out. She still displays the desperate desires of that young Brachiosaurus, the need to get out of the cave, back to the sunlight and her herd. She doesn't know 150 million years have passed. Slime molds don't experience old age. She has no way of knowing that they're not waiting for her out there.
So what would happen if she does get out and finds her world is so completely changed? Her herd is long dead, without even descendants to seek familiarity in. Her closest living relatives are now tiny feathered things that flit from tree to tree, not hulking great megafauna roaming the forests. She wouldn't recognize them. She would find nothing left of the world she desires, except, perhaps, the sun. She would be alone to a degree that we can barely comprehend. Last of her kind, and not even that, a twisted approximation of what she was. But she need not remain the last of her kind.
For the slime mold, living 150 million years as a plasmodium, conditions have now changed. While slime molds normally avoid the light, that changes to seeking it out once they have consumed enough nutrition to reproduce. And an entire Brachiosaurus was certainly enough nutrition.
Perhaps we were wrong about Sisyphus. Maybe there was no chemical memory of her last desperate desire to return home to the world of light. Maybe it was just the slime mold's drive to reproduce. The mind of Sisyphus, if she still has one, is completely unknowable. But either motive results in the same unyielding desire to reach the world of light.
Now not only has the desire of the god on which it fed been completed, though not in the way she would have wished, Sisyphus has now reached the light and found herself in a world with freely available nutrition. Maybe that's just a forest filled with leaves, or maybe that's a human settlement with all the scraps we leave lying around. In the light, surrounded by plentiful nutrition, it is time for the plasmodium to release its spores. This is the time and place. Sisyphus has escaped her cave and found nothing she wants here. The slime mold sporulates, falling away as it sheds billions of microscopic single-celled spores into the world and falls away. This is the fall of Sisyphus.
Perhaps at this time the local authorities set out to destroy her. Fire is pretty destructive, and liquid nitrogen would plausibly destroy small parts of her, but slime molds can regenerate from just one cell. Her magnificent body, which carried her through 150 million years, may degrade, but you'll never know whether you got rid of every single one of those spores once they're out there in the world. Maybe they'll end up living typical slime mold lives now, or maybe they'll learn to mimic some other shape. Only time will tell, and slime molds don't just die of old age. So why has Sisyphus failed for 150 million years to find her way out of the cave? Because the slime mold doesn't take risks. It only follows basic rules. Move towards something interesting. If that doesn't work, go somewhere different. She's travelled a long way, explored a huge area, but never found her way out. because she won't go into areas that she finds physically unpleasant, which could potentially damage her cell. Not if she has any other option. She doesn't consider that she could risk it, that she could leave the bulk of her body in a safe area and move just one appendage through an unpleasant area to investigate the other side. Slime molds like moist conditions, but they don't like to be submerged. She's never explored any segment of cave that was underwater. Not like you, our brave adventurer with your guide ropes, who traversed submerged caverns. They also don't like salt or low oxygen concentrations.
So in her cave, Sisyphus will remain until either the eons reshape the cave so she can find an exit, or she decides to follow your guide ropes out through the water.
Obviously, I love Sisyphus as a horror monster. She has a lot going for her, and she feeds the imagination on a delicious melange of concepts. She's a corrupted innocent and a friend who came back wrong. She resides firmly in the uncanny valley as an unknowable intelligence who cannot be negotiated with. She's not evil, just hungry and desperate. She is so large and her anatomy completely warped. She's the last of her kind. All of her kin are long dead, her world changed. And while she was once fueled by desperate hope, we know that if she achieves her desire, all that's waiting for her is despair and the realization of all she lost. This was Sisyphus, the Cave Brachiosaurus, and she's not technically as impossible as you might think. Check out Crabdominal Pain's other social media for more creations and art. And if there's some other entity you'd like to see me give the speculative biology treatment to, please leave a comment below. My name is Dr. Ferox. I will see you next time. And remember, Sisyphus or something like her could be down there, just waiting for the right rope to follow back up into the light.